And then the only thought in our mind is getting them off the ventilator that's actually working. I've never really understood that. And what we can do is we can take the ventilator here, take the jet straight to extubation, and we don't need to hastily get off of it and go to conventional ventilation. So one of the things that makes the jet a little bit different from an oscillator, and we'll talk more about this in just a second though, but it's a time-cycled machine, and you have a set fixed inspiratory time. And when you have a set fixed inspiratory time, that means you can get different IDE ratios. And so depending on the disease process that we're treating, this is going to make a lot of sense here. Now, how the jet delivers those high frequency pulses and those tidal volumes is via this little special ET tube adapter here. And so you know that when you use the jet, you have to change out the existing ET tube adapter with, we call it the life port jet ET tube adapter. But guys, the adapter does a lot more than just allow you to connect the conventional and the jet together. The little adapter here is actually kind of what makes the jet a jet, okay? You can see here, we have a cross section here of the adapter. As the jet gas comes in through the side port there, it goes through a little restriction right here, and then it turns downward and gets squirted straight down the ET tube. It just doesn't come in at a 90-degree angle, hit the sidewall, get all turbulent, okay? The gas flow is very streamlined. So what happens to a flow of gas as it goes through a restriction? It's got to speed up, right? It's one of Bernoulli's principles, right? It's like when you're watering your yard and you put your thumb over your garden hose, okay? That's the same type of thing. So these little tiny high-frequency pulses that gain a lot of speed, a lot of momentum, and it creates for a very brief period of time what we call transitional flow or flow streaming. And that's what allows the jet to deliver its high-frequency pulses in the airways very, very quickly. It creates jet streams in the airways. The gas is being delivered so quickly, their tidal volumes are so small, that there's not enough time for a pressure gradient to be exerted on the airway walls here. And that's because you don't have to push all the dead space out of the way like you have to do with normal ventilators, and to some extent like you do with an oscillator. The jet gas here penetrates through the middle of the dead space. It takes the path of least resistance, which is always through the center of the airways, because you have friction of air molecules on the airway walls and so forth. And due to the inrushing gas as it's coming in so quickly, the kinetic energy of that inrushing gas, exhalation occurs around the gas that's actually coming in. So in the upper airways, from about the fourth or fifth branching on up, you have true bidirectional flow. You have inhalation and exhalation actually occurring at the exact same time. It's not like inhalation stop, exhalation, like normal. But yeah, true. And so when we have, gas traffic and we have issues like that, that's one of the reasons that the jet works very, very well to kind of get things churned up and get things going. You can see that it would also make sense for patients who may have some secretion issues. If they have a pneumonia type process, thick secretions, a meconium aspiration type baby, the jet works very, very well to help clear and mobilize those secretions there. So because of this gas not exerting any pressure or volume really on the airway walls here, a lot of our most successful jet patients have been TE fistulas and BP fistulas, where the jet gas literally shoots right past the hole and it doesn't aggravate it at all whatsoever. That's the study that's been replicated and done where I think they took some cats. So sorry if you like cats, but I think they took some cats, they cut out holes in their trachea and actually measured absolutely no volume loss whatsoever when using the jet out of there. So are both high frequency ventilators, are they the same? Kind of and no. I mean, yeah, they're both high frequency, which means there's a lot of similarities, meaning it's very gentle on the lungs. You have an attenuation of your delta P or your amplitude as it travels down the airway, so it's very, very gentle. So that all that stuff is pretty similar there. But there are major differences between the two machines. With an oscillator, it's active exhalation, so the piston pushes the gas in, but it also actively sucks the gas back out. Okay. The oscillator has a percent cycle inspiratory cycle, so that's 33% normally. So no matter what your rate is on, you're always at 33% I time, which means your ID ratio is always what? 1 to 2. Right. And that works really well for certain disease processes. If it's a homogeneous type disease process, if it's kind of your typical little preemie PRDS type kid, that works pretty well. But when they start to become overinflated and gas trapping, and maybe they develop an air leak or two, maybe we need some longer exhalation times. And so, sometimes that doesn't work quite as well. Because it's a percent cycle machine, your tidal volume delivery with the oscillator is very dependent on your frequency, on the rate that you're at. Okay, so as you lower your hertz, of course, your I time gets longer. As your I time gets longer, volume delivery increases. And so the wonderful thing that I love about the oscillator is its simplicity. But then sometimes this is where the simplicity can hamper us as far as some of our patient management decisions go there. The jet ventilator is passive exhalation, just normal, recoil of the lungs there in our chest wall. It has a set fixed time cycle, 0.02 seconds. That's the default setting. So it doesn't matter what rate you're on, your I time is always 0.02. And if your I time is always that, then when you change the rate, you manipulate that I to E ratio. Okay, so we get really, really long exhalation times. And because your I time is set and fixed, your tidal volume is now set and fixed as well. Your tidal volume is only dependent on your jet PIP, or more specifically, your delta P that you're at. It doesn't matter what jet rate you're at, because your I time is always 0.02. And the jet uses incredibly low flow there. So when we look at how to use it more effectively and how we use the jet, especially in conjunction with the conventional ventilator, it's very, very easy, I think, sometimes to kind of get overwhelmed by the fact that we've got 2 PIPs and 2 Ps and rates and that type of stuff. Well, separate the 2 ventilator guys because they do 2 completely different things. All the jet does is blow off CO2. That's all it does. I know it's an old, big, ugly looking machine, but it puts in very, very tiny puffs of gas very, very quickly, and it's a very effective ventilator. It can bring the CO2 down in a hurry. That's all the jet does. So in other words, guys, if you have a CO2 problem, you're going to touch the jet. If you have an oxygenation problem, if you have a lung volume problem, atelectasis, something along those lines, you're going to touch the conventional. So draw a line between the 2 vents. They do 2 completely different things, but we are doing something very cool where we're combining them together to help get the job done. And kind of think of it this way. This right here is like 85% of patient management, okay? The only time that I can see with an increased CO2 using the conventional ventilator is if I have atelectasis, right? If I have atelectasis and my CO2 is high because I have atelectasis, I mean, you can go up on jet pressures all you want, it's not going to blow off CO2. But in that case, I will use the conventional ventilator. I'll increase PEEP, maybe give that background sigh breaths and recruit the lung back, and then I can. So let's talk a little bit more about this conventional ventilator business and what it's all about and how to truly use it. Its primary purpose and goal is to provide PEEP and mean airway pressure. Now, you see it being monitored on the jet. It's read on the jet, but it's actually given from the conventional ventilator itself. And remember, mean airway pressure, the vast majority of your mean airway pressure is going to come from PEEP, okay? So I'm going to be talking about adjusting PEEP, but it's also, I want you to think of it as adjusting your mean airway pressure because they very much go hand in hand. The background ventilator also gives, well, normal conventional ventilator breaths. And that's the one really cool thing about using the jet with a conventional ventilator, is that you're doing something very unique. You're combining 2 very different modes of positive pressure ventilation, but you're combining them together to help take care of this kid. Because when we have lung volume loss and atelectasis, in order to recruit the lung back, we have to push in enough volume to get past the critical opening pressure to pop the alveoli open. Well, that's something high frequency will never do. It's too small, it's too weak, it's too gentle. So that's where we use our sigh breaths from the conventional ventilator to help recruit the lung. The conventional ventilator also gives gas flow for the baby to breathe spontaneously. We definitely need that, we want that. And all the exhaled gas actually goes out the conventional. So the conventional does a lot of stuff here, okay? Appreciate the power and how much support the conventional ventilator actually gives. How successful you are with the jet is actually very much determined by how successful you are at using the conventional ventilator. The airways aren't open, if we don't have optimal PEEP, if we're not doing all this stuff, then the jet's absolutely worthless, okay? So there's a big emphasis on using the conventional ventilator and using it appropriately to get the job done. And I think it all revolves around finding this optimal PEEP thing. You know, as we drive tidal volume smaller and smaller and smaller with high frequency ventilation, two things must be raised. One, obviously, is the rate to help maintain our minute ventilation. But the other thing that you must increase is your PEEP/mean airway pressure. And that's because you have to keep airways resistance to a minimum in order for high frequency to be effective. Now, we don't think about this too much with an oscillator, right? Because when we throw kids on the oscillator, what do we do to the mean? We always crank it up, right? We always add 2 or 3 to whatever we're at on a conventional ventilator or something along those lines there. And therefore, the airways are always stented open and resistance is kept to a minimum, and that's what makes it pretty effective. But on the jet, it's a little bit different because you have to adjust PEEP. And PEEP is your primary determinant of mean airway pressure, and sometimes that freaks some people out. You know, maybe being a PEEP of 10 or 11 or even 12 in these little babies in the NICU. It shouldn't. We'll talk more about that in a second, but that is going to be your primary control for oxygenation. So the jet also, right next to the PEEP display, has the mean airway pressure display. That's what we need to focus our efforts on. Not so much what PEEP is, but what is our mean airway pressure, okay? And so even though we have air leaks and gas trapping and all this type of stuff, and I know we want the lowest mean airway pressure we can't forget about just the normal physiologic PEEP that we have to have in the lungs. Often we get so wrapped up into treating what's wrong that we forget about what's right. Right? We got some blebs over here. We turn PEEP down, turn PEEP down. The next thing you know, poof, you got whiteout atelectasis over here. Now you got this nightmare non-homogeneous disease process, and that's because we kept turning PEEP down to try to fix these air leaks, and it's a mess. The thing that we have to remember is that it's an airways resistance issue. If the airways are stented open and resistance is kept to a minimum, then you can allow this trapped gas to escape, and you're allowing the jet to be more effective. And where PEEP really, really comes into play, especially with airways resistance, is upon exhalation. Remember, the jet's passive exhalation, okay? And when the airways resistance, I think, goes up by a factor of 4 upon exhalation there. And so in order to stent the airways open to keep that resistance to a minimum, it's important that we have enough PEEP. So how much PEEP do we need, and you know, what kind of PEEP should we be on? Well, the real question here, guys, isn't how much PEEP should we be on. The real question is how much mean airway pressure do you want to be on? That's the bigger picture. See, mean airway pressure is different in all machines. How you get mean airway pressure is different in all machines. So here we are with a conventional ventilator. We're given large volume, a large pressure, a long I time. And so in order to keep a mean of, let's just call this 12, you know, PEEP doesn't have to be very much, maybe 5 or 6, right? Keep a mean of 12, not very much. But when you switch to the pitter-patter of the jet with its small pressures, the short I times, in order to keep the same mean airway pressure of 12, you must raise PEEP up. And so now, instead of being down here at 5 or 6, I'm going to be up here at 9, maybe even 10. Does a PEEP of 10 sound scary? Sometimes. I mean, I visit a lot of hospitals where that's very, very scary to them. But if your mean airway pressure is only 12, what are you worried about? See why you have to look at the mean airway pressure on the jet and stop freaking out so much about what the PEEP is at, okay? The jet running by itself only puts in 3 centimeters of mean airway pressure. And we'll see that in a minute when we fire it up and get it going. And it's at the default settings. So let that be a guide to you to kind of figure out what your optimal PEEP should be. It's really about what your optimal mean airway pressure should be. If I need a mean of 13, if the mean airway pressure of 13 is what makes my baby happy, and my jet puts in 3 of that 13, how much PEEP am I going to be on? 10. There you go. That's it. And so that's where, if you, and this kind of rule of 3 I've used for, golly, nearly 20 years now. It works very, very well to not underestimate. One of the biggest pitfalls of using the jet is when you first start out the jet. That's where people freak the most, and where patients have issues. Why? And I think it's often because we underestimate the PEEP that we need when we first start off the jet. So let's say we're at a mean of 16 over here on an oscillator. Our baby developed some blebs, so we go to the jet. So we're at a mean of 16. And now we got an order to go to the jet, and your PEEP is 6 or 7. Well, if the jet adds 3, that means your mean's only going to be 10. So you're going to go from 16 to 10 when you first start out. What do you think is going to happen? The kid's going to crash on you. It happens every time. So now you can catch this before it happens. You can realize that, hey, this PEEP that I have of 6 or 7 that's ordered, it's way too low. When I first transitioned my patient to the jet, aim for a higher mean airway pressure, get them stabilized, and then titrate it down. You know, and so the way I always kind of approach it is the ordered PEEP of 7 that you have, okay, that's where you want to be. That's not going to be where you start. That's where you're going to be a little bit later once everything is stabilized. But if you start off there, it's going to be too low. So start high. You can either match the mean airway pressures, or if you're coming from an oscillator, just be 1 or 2 centimeters less. You know, aim for the mean of 13, get the patient stabilized, everybody's going to be happy, and then once your FiO2 drops below 40, 35%, then you work that PEEP down to where you want it to be. Okay, and there's a little thing here. Going to the jet is so stressful. It doesn't have to be if we think about stuff like this. And don't bottom them out and fight to work your way back up. So the best way to adjust mean airway pressure while using the jet is to use PEEP. Okay? The second best way is to use PEEP. The third best way is to use PEEP again. Okay. I'm hammering that home because that is the most direct way. It's a one-for-one thing. If you increase your PEEP by 1 centimeter, your mean will go up by 1 centimeter. PEEP is the lowest and safest form of positive pressure that we give. It's a static form of positive pressure. I never understood why we're so afraid of it. PEEP is not dangerous. It's what we put on top of PEEP that makes it dangerous. Okay. Now, if we change any of our other jet settings, the pressure, the rate, does that affect mean? Yeah, it sure does. Background, if you're at a background rate of 0 and then all of a sudden you have a background rate of 5, is that going to change your mean? Yes, it will. So in order to get your mean airway pressure back to where you need it to be, use PEEP. PEEP is the mean adjust knob on an oscillator. It does the exact same thing, right? When you adjust the mean adjust knob on an oscillator, what are you manipulating? The exhalation diaphragm, that mushroom diaphragm on the end of things. When you increase mean, the diaphragm expands more and creates more resistance. It's PEEP. It's the same thing. You know, they're just cool enough because they don't have PEEP as a display for you to read. Okay, we do. So, you know, take a piece of tape and cover the PEEP display, and then there you go. You don't have PEEPophobia. Because the next question is how high is too high of PEEP? Is 12 too high? 13? No, there's no number. It's the effect. When you get to the point of hemodynamic compromise, then you've gone too high in your PEEP. But you have to let the baby tell you that. You know, you're more afraid to turn that knob from 9 to 10 than the baby is, I know.
The original oscillator actually had the label as PEEP.
It did.
And when they started using it, there wasn't a doctor that would actually take the oscillator and put it on a patient. So they took it back to the factory, changed the sign to mean airway pressure, everybody was happy.
They did. They did. I've been privileged.
Way back.
It is. You know, Bob,
Oh, history for days.
It was right here, it was about
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it was Bob DeLamos in group there, and I've had I've been very, very fortunate to hang out with other great guys like Don Knoll and Dale Gerstmann and all those guys there too, and kind of the Wilford Hall, San Antonio guys for that, and that's very, very true. So we have it. It's a good thing, and then sometimes it's a bad thing. Don't let it be a bad thing. Get over it. Look at the mean airway pressure. That's what you're after. And then your limit on PEEP is not a number. Your limit on PEEP is blood pressure, okay? When the patient decides that he's had enough, then you've reached your limit there. So the background breaths. Really, really awesome for lung recruitment. Remember, that's putting in enough volume to get past the critical opening pressure to pop the alveoli open. But as you can understand, these are large volumes. And if I have an air leak, if I have a pneumo or PIE, I don't want large volumes, right? So we want to be on CPAP for those kids. So the basic rule with using the side breaths are simply this. Use them when you need to and don't when you don't. If you have atelectasis, use the background side breaths, reverse the lung volume loss. Okay. But if lung volumes look good and you don't have atelectasis, then you don't need to be on a background rate. All right? So what we hear a lot, like I'm on our clinical hotline, and when I go out and visit hospitals, what we hear a lot is, well, I was on a rate of 5 and I went down to CPAP and the kid didn't like it, so I went back to a rate of 5. No, what he likes is his lungs not collapsing. That's what he likes. Okay, if we take the background rate away or we reduce it and our SATs drop, then that just simply means we don't have enough PEEP. You shouldn't have to keep re-recruiting the lungs, right? I mean, I know it's kind of corny, but lungs should only have to be open once if we've optimized PEEP, right? So if we find ourselves continuously having to use a background rate of 5, or maybe we have to go higher, 8, maybe 10 at the most, if we find ourselves that every time we try to reduce that, we have desaturations and our oxygenation suffers, then we've not optimized PEEP here. And so as we look at pushing in enough volume to finally pop open the lung and get past that critical opening pressure here, it's real important to recognize that just increasing PEEP or your mean airway pressure doesn't necessarily mean you're going to recruit, right? PEEP prevents de-recruitment. It doesn't necessarily recruit. It doesn't recruit by itself. It's a 2-step process. You got to push in enough volume to get things open first, and then you have to have enough PEEP to prevent it from collapsing, right? Now, if everything was optimal and when everything is cool, this is the optimal area of the loop here where high frequency would be most effective, where the bottom part of your delta P sits just above your PEEP level. Okay, that's where it's supposed to. But you can see, however, that if I have atelectasis, even though I increase PEEP and I increase mean airway pressure, it doesn't mean I'm hitting the critical opening pressure to pop the alveoli open. I'm kind of just opening more what's already open, right? And so that's why the conventional ventilator really comes in handy. It's kind of a 2-step process to more effectively recruit the lung. And why simply just increasing PEEP sometimes doesn't work. Now, when we have oxygenation issues, increasing PEEP or your mean airway pressure, that should be the first thing that we do. But if you go up by a sonometer or 2 and it's not working, then even without getting an x-ray, put on a background, I'll tell you, you probably have some atelectasis, probably right up below atelectasis, right? Because every intubated baby gets right up below atelectasis. That's where you could just simply turn on the background side breath and recruit the lung and do kind of a temporary lung recruitment maneuver, maybe only 20 or 30 minutes. But it is important to recognize the differences between the two ventilators and the volumes that they give, of course. So the conventional ventilator gives large volume. So here in a fishbowl, I've torn off one of the balloons off the test lung and created an air leak. And of course, where does all this large volume go from the conventional? Right out the hole there, and you see all the bubbling. But you can see here how the jet ventilator is still ventilating the other parts, even this part right here that's directly adjacent to my injured area right here, my air leak. For this example, the conventional set at a pressure of 20, the jet's at a pressure of 30. Wow. I got the jet at 30, yet that 30 is so weak and so gentle, it can't even produce a single bubble right here. But the gas does get redirected to the good parts of the lung, and it leaves the injured part of the lung alone. That's why the jet works for these types of kids. But this is also a lesson in why those background side breaths can be detrimental. If I have a pneumo, and I have chest tubes, and I have PIE, if I'm using the background side breaths, where's that gas going? To that injured area, and it's making that area worse. Okay? So that's why it's real important when we're dealing with an air leak situation to be on CPAP, just be on PEEP straight up, and not have any background breaths. So now that we've got oxygenation out of the way, let's talk about ventilation, which is, again, all about the jet. And the jet PIP is your primary control for ventilation. And that's because when you increase the jet PIP, you create a delta P, your delta P creates a delta V, and that's what blows off CO2. But remember, your gas exchange formula is a little bit different now. It's now just rate times tidal volume squared. It's not just rate times tidal volume anymore. So any change that you make to your volume delivery is going to have a much, much more profound effect on changing your CO2 than changing the rate ever will. Okay. Now, remember, this is the jet. On the oscillator, it's different. Why? Because when I change the frequency on the oscillator, I change the volume. Okay. So with the jet, however, to create that larger change of volume, you manipulate your PIP, which gives you your larger delta P there. Okay, but again, it's high frequency, which means the lungs see way, 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 way less of what's actually dialed in. We often say the lungs see less than 10% of what's actually dialed in. As a matter of fact, what's the greatest point of restriction in the intubated baby? The ET tube itself. Just by the time that pressure exits the ET tube, it's dropped by 30, if not 40%. And if it's a 2.5 tube, it's a little bit more than that. So even though the jet is labeled PIP, if you're in the mid-30s or even 40, it's fine. It's cool, because that's not what the lungs are actually seeing. On a conventional, absolutely, that's what they're seeing. But don't be afraid to turn up the jet PIP. We have an encore showing of the fishbowl, so let's get past that. Okay. But what about the jet rate, though? And what kind of role does that play? Well, it's all about trying to match and even exceed your expiratory pulmonary time constants here. Again, it's an airways resistance issue with exhalation. Gas trapping is gas going in that can't get out, right? And so we need to make it as absolutely as easy as possible for the gas that's trapped to get out. The first thing that we do is what we've already talked about, optimizing PEEP, making sure we have enough PEEP to stint the airways open to keep resistance to a minimum so that gas that's trapped can't get out. But the other thing that we can do is make sure that we have a sufficient exhalation time, okay? And make sure that we have enough time for that gas that is trapped to get out. And that's where the IDE ratios really come into play, okay? So normally when we first turn the jet on, we're here at the default setting of 420, where you have an IDE ratio of 1 to 6, okay? And you weren't supposed to skip ahead. Let me get back to that screen. So the IDE ratio, there you go. So the IDE ratio becomes a very important part about treating our patients more effectively. Now, for the longest time, you could leave kids at 420 no matter what disease process was going on, and it always seemed to work. Yeah, it did. And that's because of what's called resonant frequency ranges. You know, for certain disease processes, you have resonant frequency ranges where you're matching those time constants. And 420 is kind of in the middle. You know what a Venn diagram is, where you have like, 3 circles, but they're all joined right there in the middle. They share the middle part. Okay, that's 420. The middle part's 420. So if you're treating an RDS kid, you can be here, and 420 is just kind of at the bottom end of that. If you're treating an air leak baby, you could be at a range down here, and 420 is kind of at the upper end of that. And it just sits in the middle. And that's why it always seems to work. But there are awesome advantages to changing. All right, so when you lower the jet rate and you get down to these 1 to 7, 1 to 9, 1 to 12 IDE ratios, then you're really, really making good strides towards physiologically taking care of the baby and his needs there. So one of the things that kind of I'd like to point out is, even though you go from 420 down to 360, you're making a move in the right direction. You only go from a 1 to 6 to a 1 to 7. So that's okay. It's cute. That's what it is. It's cute. But clinically, it's not a significant enough change to really make a difference. If your x-ray is overinflated and you're gas trapping, drop the jet rate. If you get down to, I don't have it here, but if you get down to 320, it's a 1 to 8. A 300 is a 1 to 9. You get down there in that range, now you're really, really pushing towards getting that gas trapping and that overinflation taken care of there. And then subsequently, if we're taking care of like a little micro preemie, 24 weeker, 400 gram, 500 gram, nothing, his lungs, they're small, they're stiff, he's got very tiny volume, so his resonant frequency range is more up here. Don't be afraid to go up to 480 or 540 even if you have to, okay? There. So change the rate based on the pathophysiology that you're treating, and it's something that you kind of set and you forget. Set, for most kids it's air leak, so set the jet rate low, leave it alone, let the jet do its job, and then just control your CO2 with your delta P and the jet PIP from there, okay? Now, when you adjust the jet rate down, you are also going to change your mean airway pressure. Now, that's a really cool thing, because if you're dealing with an overinflated gas trapping type kid, you want a lower mean airway pressure, right? So by lowering the jet rate, not only do you get a longer exhalation time, but you get a lower mean airway pressure, and you didn't touch Pete to get that lower mean airway pressure. So it's a very, very cool strategy. By making one move, you kind of accomplish two different things here that we were trying to take care of. If you're hanging out here at 360 or maybe 300, if you've been at that for a day or two and the x-ray still looks like it's overinflated, then that's all the evidence you need to suggest even lowering the jet rate even more. So it's pretty much the x-ray that tells me how to manipulate the jet rate, okay? If it's overinflated, you ask yourself a simple yes or no question: would my patient benefit from a longer exhalation time? If the answer is yes, then lower the jet rate. And if you've been at that rate for a day or two and the x-ray still doesn't look better, then that's all the evidence you need to go down even lower. So please take it. It's a very, very cool thing to use and take care of. You know, it's one of those things there over the years, 420 works. You know, it always seems to work. And that's, I think, for a long time why we never ever changed it. You know, we never, because it was kind of like, you know, we had a kid with an air leak and, you know, 5 days later, he might look better. Well, at 420. Well, now if we're dropping the jet rate to 300, I might get a better looking x-ray tomorrow or 48 hours later, not. So the end result is the kid always got better. But now we're just making more out of this machine. But what about this servo pressure thing? It's something that I know we chart it, but I think it's often overlooked as far as its importance. And servo pressure is essentially the gas flow required to meet your PIP. It's nothing you set. The jet automatically figures it out. It automatically delivers it. And by definition, it's the driving pressure to reach your set PIP. But what it is, guys, is simply gas flow. It's a automatic controlled gas flow that's going in to reach your PIP, and it's based upon the monitored pressure that you're receiving from the little jet ET tube adapter there. So if this is my baby here, and there's the PIP I need to get to, and that's my servo pressure. Well, as compliance improves and I have more volume to fill, if I have more volume to fill, initially my PIP is going to drop a little bit. So in response to that, the servo pressure will go up to bring your PIP back up to where it needs to be. You have a higher flow. Okay? So the servo pressure always reacts to what it sees. Okay? So sometimes when you come into the room, you know, you have a high servo pressure alarm going off, and you're thinking, why is my high servo pressure alarm going off? No, don't think that way. What you have to think is, why did my PIP drop down to make my servo pressure go high? Does that make sense? So the servo pressure always reacts to the monitored PIP and what the monitored PIP is doing. So subsequently, let's say my kid gets septic, he perks, and all of a sudden his lung volume shrinks. Well, then all of a sudden my PIP is too high, and then the servo pressure will come down to bring that PIP right back down to where it needs to be. So servo pressure is always moving up and down because your monitored pressure is always moving up and down. But it compensates for stuff. So, you know, even if you have a leak around the ET tube, you're set at a pressure of 24, we reposition the patient, and we have a leak around the tube. So now instead of getting 24, the jet's only giving 20. Servo pressure goes up to bring the 20 back to 24. Okay. So it's a variable flow mechanism to reach that target PIP that you're after there. You know? So some of the most common things that you'll come across when you see the servo pressure changing, going up and going down, here's, like I said before, the ET tube leak, where initially there's a PIP drop. So the servo pressure goes up to bring your PIP back up to where it's supposed to be. If you have an air leak like a pneumo, obviously that's a leak. So initially your pressure will drop again, but the servo will come up to compensate for it. But if we reposition the wrong way and we right main stem, then all of a sudden we've only got half the volume I'm dealing with, the right one. So my PIP will go up and the servo will come down. If the pneumo gets really bad and it's a tension pneumo, then the pressure will go away. But your day-to-day use of this, I think, is with secretions. You know, we always run around, how often should we suction this kid, and that type of stuff. Well, let the servo pressure tell you, you know, if the sats are dropping and if we're trying to decide whether it's worth suctioning or not, look at the servo. If it's a little bit less than it was before, then it's probably worth going down and suctioning. And so trending that servo pressure of it going up and going down and what his normal is, the baseline, that is a really, really big clue to kind of tell you what's going on with the kid. So the last section here is weaning. So we've talked about the jet, we've talked about the conventional ventilator, all about oxygenation, how it all kind of gels together. Now we come to the part that's more art than science, okay, the weaning. Remember, your goal here is with your patient is to extubate and send them home with mom and dad. Our goal isn't to get them off high frequency, okay? High frequency is, both jets and oscillators, they are the most gentle kind of positive pressure ventilation that we get, intubated, okay? I've never understood why we're so quick to take them off of high frequency when we can just extubate straight to nasal CPAP, because that's pretty much all it is. But we often kind of come across these phases here. So we have this recovery phase where a kid's not doing so well, we throw them on the jet, it's a rescue mode, we use crazy pressures and crazy strategies, finally we rescue the kid, and we've gotten really good at doing this over the years. And then there's a stabilization phase where you have to chill out. You have to let the baby grow. You have to let the airway inflammation die down a little bit and the chronic process die down. And then you have the weaning phase. But all too often, we forget about stabilization, we go straight into weaning, which leads us right into recovery again, okay? And so I'm all about trying to get the kid extubated quickly and sooner rather than later. But at the same time, sometimes my human impatience leads me into worse settings than I was before, okay? And so this is just one of those things to think about. But my idea about when I finally get a good blood gas, if my CO2s were in the 80s, 90s, and finally I got everything tweaked and I finally have a good blood gas, to me, that means do nothing. That means your current ventilator settings are giving you a good blood gas. Because if I wean after finally getting a good blood gas, my CO2 is going to go right back up again. Okay? Now, you can wean when the blood gas becomes a little too good. Okay? Then we can start weaning. But that's that stabilization phase that I was talking about. That when you finally hit that right delta P, when you finally hit that right jet rate, everything sinks together. Chill out in the stabilization phase and don't be so aggressive with weaning, because it leads to recovery again, and it leads to longer stints of them being intubated and on the ventilator there. So when do we look to extubate? Taking the settings all the way down. Your mean airway pressure will be usually below 10, usually 9 or 8 or so. And then that's where the baby's breathing spontaneously, pull the tube and throw them on nasal, non-invasive nasal CPAP or nasal IV. So given everything that we've talked about today and what we know of the jet, where are we going to use it? Remember, the number one problem with using the jet is the startup. People waiting too late. Well, is it maybe because we're unfamiliar with the jet? Well, now that we're more familiar with the jet, how to use it, I think it's very easily to show what kind of patients are going to benefit from using the jet. By far and away, air leak type kids, overinflated gas trapping type kids. Use the jet to prevent lung injury. In a lot of institutions, as soon as patients fail nasal non-invasive, especially if they're little tiny microcremies, they go straight on the jet to prevent air leaks from occurring. Non-homogeneous disease processes work very, very well with the jet. I think homogeneous are better with an oscillator, but I think non-homogeneous works very well. So that diaphragmatic hernia, hypoplastic lung, that type of thing. If what you're doing isn't working currently, think about using the jet. Patients who have secretion issues, patients who are hemodynamically compromised. That was a paper that was done here by Philip Friedlich years ago, where they looked at patients who had hemodynamic compromise on an oscillator because the mean airway pressures were so high, and on echo, these patients had inflated superior and inferior vena cava, backup of blood pressure in the hepatic veins, and so when patients are tearing through dopamine and volume and we're compromising things that way, if a lower mean airway pressure can help, then certainly the jet can help those patients. And then, when everything else has failed and you don't know what else the hell to do, it's always a great reason to pull the jet out, okay? If you have a kid that's just not responding to anything else and you haven't tried the jet yet, then try the jet. It's different. It may work, it may not, but I don't know unless we try. Okay? And so that's kind of really where it kind of comes from. So when I think about the typical user biases of institutions that have both an oscillator and the jet, I think it's pretty much kind of a standard that we use high frequency oscillation early. We use it for our little micropenis. We use it usually as our first line of rescue mode when our patient is failing conventional. But once lung injury occurs, once we have the air leak and the overinflation, sometimes it's really not that great at treating it. It's great at preventing lung injury, but maybe not treating it. Peggy.
Can you talk about cannot meet PIP? Right now we have a patient that Gabe just got called for. And of course, off and on, they keep getting that with this particular patient.
Cannot meet PIP alarm? That specifically means the jet for 3 minutes is trying to stabilize the PIP with the servo pressure, and it can't. So we're having weird pressure fluctuations that are beyond the realm of normal. So that's either a mechanical issue or a patient issue. The mechanical issue thing to look for is to make sure we have the right size jet adapter in place. If this is a patient that's intubated with a 3.0 or a 3.5, if we're using the smaller 2.5 jet adapter, that could, from a mechanical cause it. If it's not that, then it's just the patient. I mean, remember, it's a monitored pressure. So as the patient is active and moving around and things like that, he's causing changes to the pressure. And if the servo can't keep up with all those types of changes, you'll get a cannot meet PIP alarm. It doesn't mean the jet's not working. The jet is working. It's just not able to stabilize the PIP to get that there. So the best way to kind of fix that is just do your normal assessment. Make sure ET tube's in good position that it's at there. Press the enter button, let the jet start over as far as trying to figure out what it needs to get to stabilize the PIP with the servo pressure there, and then once you're there and you get the ready light on, then you're good to go. But,
So your other recommendations for fixing this, do you have another recommend besides sedating the kid? Because I think a lot of it has to do with sedation for this kid.
Yeah.
Because this kid is breathing so much.
yeah, if he's causing that much problem and that much issue, especially to the point to which he's decompensating, then we definitely need sedation for that. Other than that, no, I don't, we want the baby to breathe on their own if they can. But if it's to the point of causing issues and problems, then no, we need to give them a little bit. So keep in mind your basics. Oxygenation is all about mean airway pressure. Mean airway pressure is all about your conventional ventilator and setting PEEP. Your ventilation is all about creating a delta P with the jet. Use the jet PIP to increase your delta P, and use the jet rate for the right IDE ratio. Get the lung open with your PSI background recruitment breaths. Keep the lung open with your PEEP, mean airway pressure, and then let the jet do its job, which is general ventilation. But again, guys, you can see here, the jet is absolutely worthless if we're not doing these two things first, and specifically probably the middle step, okay? So, if you find yourself going up and up and up on the jet PIP and it's not blowing off CO2, assess your lung volume, okay? Let's get an x-ray, let's look at, I mean, chances are your oxygenation is probably suffering at this time too, so you'll have a pretty good idea. But if we have these things, then the jet will work. The two, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of PEEP. Controls mean airway pressure, okay? Remember what I said earlier about the jet only puts in 3 of mean airway pressure just running by itself. So if I need a mean of 14, I'm going to be on a PEEP of 11, okay? And that's okay, all right? Don't be afraid of the jet PIP. If you need to be at a PIP of 35 or 40 to get a good chest movement, it's fine, it's cool. You got to go to 45. I mean, I hope you don't have to, but if you have to, it's all right. Because remember how much that pressure drops off and dampens. Okay. And then optimally, when we're taking care of these airway gas traffic type babies, we want no background rate. Remember, the large volumes aggravate the air leaks, so we want CPAP. But that also means we may have to have higher mean airway pressure and higher PEEP to maintain our mean airway pressure there. And then lower the jet rate. Okay. these 3 steps here is set you up for optimal success for taking care of the airway kids. And then, of course, anytime you guys are having trouble, you call us up on the hotline, okay? That 800 number's on the front of the jet. It's on pretty much every printed piece of paper that we have. But this 800 number is 24/7, 365. Even on leap years, we're 366. And you know, I'm on call for us right now. And between myself, Dave, and Evan, we're the 3 main guys that are on call. And every now and then you'll get Dr. Bunnell. You know, if he's in the office and not taking a nap on his couch, he'll answer the phone too. But you got to delete that one. Okay. And but guys, you have the resources here for you. Not only is it on the phone, it's on our website. We have lots of awesome little website things there. Not only handouts that you can print out, but we have little videos that you can watch. Like what is a cannot meet PIP alarm? What's a high PIP alarm? You can watch a little 2-minute video snippet of what that is and how to correct it. We made our website mobile friendly here, so if you go to it on your mobile phone, go to Bunnell on your mobile phone, quick start guide, patient management, videos, FAQs, downloads, the whole 9 yards. You have your pocket-sized jet handbook right here for you. At the bottom of all these screens is this one really cool button right here. It says call the hotline. So if you don't find the answer that you're looking for, you can just press that button and your phone will magically dial us on the hotline there. And then of course, as we've made it a priority here, I'm going to come out here more often. We're going to do more hands-on stuff like this in person in workshops as well.